Here's a common question. People say to me, Mark, yeah, I can see this move into value pricing is a good thing and I give people a price up front. But come on, how do I know if I've got the right price? How do I know the price is right? And the answer is very simple. You do not. You will never know if it's the right price because unfortunately, the right price doesn't exist. And I know that for us as accountants, it messes with our brains because we like precision, we like the numbers to be calculated just right. Unfortunately, in pricing, there is no such thing as the right price. And here's the reason why. Everybody values things differently. No two people value something the same. Value is subjective. If you've ever watched my video on optimal pricing and why we need to try and find out that maximum willingness to pay or buyer's reservation price, whilst we can use techniques to get there, we can get close to there, we'll never know the precise number because we can't ask the customer what the most they're willing to pay is, and we can't reach in and read into their mind. We're not mind readers. So we can use techniques, processes, to get as close as we possibly can, but we'll never know that we've got the right price. In fact, it's harder than that because every single time you price anything, you've got a new situation. You either got a different customer or a different service. It's not like a company like Starbucks, which are selling cups of coffee, and they can then test, measure over time to figure out which price point maximizes profitability. It's much harder for us because every client's different, everybody buys a different service. And so instead, we need a process. And so the key is you will never know you've got the right price, but you have to keep testing, measuring, adapting. Keep changing your prices because whilst you'll never get the right price, you'll always get a better price. And so the key is, how do we do that? How do we test and change? So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take you into the studio. You can look over my shoulder. I'm going to show you and walk you through how you test your prices using a system like cloud pricing, how you can keep testing, measuring. What are the things you change and how can you make sure you keep getting better and better and better? I'll see you in a few seconds in the software. Before you use the software for the first time in front of a client, you want to make sure you do some testing to ensure you're happy with the prices. So I've got a template opened up here for annual financial statements, and if you're a CPA or firm of accountants, you might want to use this as your starting point for the end of year work. And so I have some scope questions here. What is the annual level of sales for the client? So the price would be higher if they're turning over, let's say, 1.5 million than if they were a smaller turnover. My other main scope questions are things like what trading entity? Are they a partnership, sole trader, limited company, for example? And another key one is what accounting system they're on, or other questions to determine the quality of their accounting system. So my advice is what you would do is, having got your model, get a handful of clients, existing clients. If, for example, you are using annual financial statements, I might choose a couple of sole traders, a couple of partnerships, and a couple of limited companies or S-corps. And then put their details through here based on your knowledge of them, not with the client, but in the safety of your office. And see how the numbers come out. Do a test quote to see what the price would be and compare that to what you currently charge that particular client. And once you've done that for half a dozen clients, you will probably see a pattern emerging along the lines of either the price is too high or it's too low, or you might find it's a little bit more difficult than that. It might be that you're finding it's a little bit on the high side for those that are with a lower turnover and not so much, but fine if they're turning over a high turnover. Or you might find that the price seems to be coming out right if they are a partnership, but if they're a sole trader, the price seems to be coming out way too expensive. So you'll start to learn, see some patterns, and then you can start to make some changes. So that's the first thing that I suggest you do. And then as you go along, as you start using it with software, you're on a journey, you're on a learning curve. And so every time you use the software, Make some notes afterwards of how it went. Which of the 3 packages did they choose? Did you get much reaction? Did they say yes straight away? And if you find when you've used this, again, half a dozen times with clients, and they are not objecting to the price, and if they typically choose the middle or even the top option, that's suggesting that you're still too cheap and we need to keep testing and pushing the boundaries. So keep analysing the results in real time as you use the software, and the more you use it and the more you analyse the results afterwards and tweak things, the better that you'll get. So how do we change things? Well, what I would suggest you do is firstly go into the software itself. I'm going to go into my templates and I will choose the annual financial statements, but it's the same process regardless of what service you are looking at. And so I'm going to hit the edit button to go into that particular template, and I'm going to show you a couple of things that I would look to change if I was testing. And the first thing that I would look for is the very first question. It should be, or not should be, but usually will be a scope question, usually is the primary scope question. So in the case of annual financial statements, it might be the size of the client in terms of annual sales. And in this particular case, I have a drop-down box with ranges. So a small client turning over, making sales of up to 80,000, I have a price of 840. And at the other end of the spectrum, I have 5 million plus at 10,200. So if I was to find that all my prices seem to be perhaps too cheap, and I'd like to test putting all the prices up by 10%, one of the simplest ways to do that would be just to go and edit this first question and increase all these numbers by 10%. Now, of course, that won't increase the end result by 10% because of all of the other subsequent questions, but it'll give you an increase of 10% to the starting point in the calculations. And that is probably a good place, at least to start for testing. Now, you might then need to go into a bit more detail. You might want to start to look at some specific questions like trading entity, where in this particular case, I've got it set up so that if it's a sole trader, it doesn't change the price, but if it's a corporate, it multiplies the price by 1.2. And if you're finding that the price seems to be okay for your sole traders, but you feel like you're not charging enough for limited companies, then it's here you go, and you might then change this 1.2 to 1.3 or 1.4 to some other number. Remember, these numbers are all guesses, it's judgment. Value pricing is judgment. There's no science behind the numbers. It's the process. If you think back to the video on optimal pricing, it's the process that's important. And we're continually testing and testing and testing to find out where is the limit on what people value things. And we will very often, I find from all my years of teaching the profession, is very often we are so cautious about pricing, we undercharge in most cases. We underprice ourselves. And so keep pushing the boundaries by changing the numbers in this particular way. Now, another place that you could look to test and change things is under expressing the price. Because what you might find is that you feel that perhaps the prices are okay, but you are noticing that when you present your different packages that most people are choosing a particular package. That could be, in the case of I've got my bronze, silver, gold is labelled entry, full and advanced accounting. So it could be that most of them are choosing the entry level and nobody's choosing the more expensive ones. And it might well be that you could test reducing the price, the relative price of the more expensive ones. Or you might find that everybody is going for the advanced one. And that's great if they are, because that's telling you you're too cheap. And if that's the case, then you could either put your price up globally in total, or you might test increasing this from 50% higher, that's 1.5 times, to perhaps 1.6 or 1.7, and see if things change, see if some people still buy at that level. So we can test in all sorts of different ways. Another thing you might test is you might test the makeup of your packages. You might take some things out, you might add some new things in. You might test your behavior rewards and have a look to see if that makes a bigger difference when you add some more in or change the numbers. It might be, for example, that you have one where you give a 15% discount when they pay you in full in advance. And you might find that nobody's taken you up on that, so you could test it as a 20% discount and keep testing to see at what point people are sufficiently attracted to give you money right up front. The key thing about testing is to keep testing. You must continually be testing your prices, and my suggestion would be is build that into your practice strategy. Whenever you have perhaps your monthly board meetings or your annual strategic planning meetings, have a standard agenda item which is to review prices. And you should be changing your prices at least every 12 months, but I would suggest that for many of your core recurring services, you analyze them, you look at the data, see what's happening every month, and you just tweak things, you change things and then get feedback.